to you, Rachel, and good morning to you all. Thank you so much for getting up so early.
Worth it for the sausage sandwich, hopefully. Anyway, do you have an insatiable drive to work?
Yes. I mean, I think I've said publicly before that I live in 2-hour chunks. So this is my Slater Heelis chunk. And then there'll be another 2-hour chunk, which will be the Catholic Church. And there'll be a Church of England church. There'll be a Lowry 2 hours. I'm also Chancellor of the University of Manchester, so there'll be a couple of hours. So I live in those kinds of environments. And quite frankly, but it's a real privilege, Rachel. I get up in the morning, do the stuff I want to do, go to bed and do the same thing tomorrow.
But then how many hours a day are you working there?
I sleep 4 hours a night.
No!
I think Margaret Thatcher used to sleep 4 hours a night, didn't she? Not that I'm in any way emulating. But yeah, I've been doing that for about 30 years. And
Now, you see, as someone who is obsessed with sleep because I work early in the morning, I get about between 5.5, 6 hours. And I think that's okay, it's manageable, but it's certainly not ideal. I don't think it's particularly good for me.
I do not recommend it, but my body is adjusted to it. And so I have 19, 20 hours a day to fill with stuff.
Wow. Well, no wonder you're saying yes to all this stuff. Right, well, let's take you away from today. Let's take you right back then to when you were a child. Talk us through a bit of family history. Do you just want to give us the potted history of the
Yeah, absolutely.
Afzals?
My family were from the traditional and tribalistic parts of northern Pakistan, and they moved to the very traditional and tribalistic parts of Birmingham, where I was born. And this was early 60s. There was an enormous number of people from South Asia that came at that time. They were working in Small Heath, which nobody knows now. They all know it because Peaky Blinders territory now, but nobody knew Small Heath back then. It was the shadow of Birmingham City Football Ground, and I did not know why I was being treated very differently by people. As a child, you wouldn't know that, would you? But evidently, people were aghast at my colour. You were literally, I'd go to school, come back with a coat that was covered in saliva, and none of it was mine. And first thing you do when you're coming back home is wash it all off. And you know that's going to happen again tomorrow. And that was, you call it a rite of passage these days, but that was not a rite of passage. That was just something you got used to.
But how did sort of 7, 8-year-old Nazir cope with that? How did you manage that through your day? Because that I obviously can't, as a white woman, remotely understand what it is like to live through that every day.
I was lucky. My life was, again, segmented back then. So I'd go to school, Marlborough Junior School, Marlborough Infant School, in Small Heath. I would go to a madrasa for 2 hours to learn the Quran, and then we didn't have Google, so I'd pop to a library and do some reading. I was bright, and so I focused entirely on my education, and I was very lucky that my family allowed me to do that. So 6 days a week I'd be learning stuff or just immersing myself in stuff. And as I said, you don't know any different. I did not know any different. So the fact that if I was being abused or spat out something, I thought that was the way it was meant to be.
And how did your parents react to that?
I think I kept it hidden. Isn't that what you do? I don't know, that's what I did. And there was one moment when I was attacked. I was about 12 or 13, and when I was attacked by 3 men who used my head as a football. Thankfully, they were rubbish at football. But nonetheless, I came home, my head is bloodied, my face is bloodied. My dad opens the door and he said 4 words, "Don't tell your mum." And you know, I never did. He just wiped it clean, and I think you just did not talk about it. You did not engage with anybody about it, you simply carried on.
Do you think that was the right thing to do?
Absolutely not, but that's self-preservation back then, and also I've been thinking about it in the last few years actually, that my family gave up everything. My parents gave up everything to come to this country to give their children the opportunities for education, and the last thing I want to do is to burden them with my problems.
So just tell us about this moment and how proud they were.
Going back to my point about not going to school, here I am graduating. My father's wearing his patka, which is a very South Asian, but particularly Pathan thing, and you can see how proud he looks. And this was University of Birmingham, where I graduated decades ago, and it was really moving. And for them to be able to be part of that was quite extraordinary.
Yeah. From there to law school.
It did. I went to Guildford Law School. Some of you have probably been there, I imagine. But it was.
Anyone here been to Guildford Law
Yeah.
School? There you go.
But it wasn't what it is now. Literally, I was the only black or brown face there. And Guildford, and that's the whole of Guildford actually, I was the only black. And I was living in a bedsit with an Irish woman. And she was, I hadn't, you know, again, look back in hindsight, this was only 10 years after the Guildford bombings. So I recognised when we'd have these conversations where she would say, you know, the new immigrants are the new Irish, you know. We were treated like this, and I still am, she would say, because of what happened in Guildford, you know, that people look at me very differently because of my background. So I had a real sort of energy, but for me, this was all tick box. I needed to graduate, I needed to get the LPC or whatever it was called then, in order to be able to pursue my career. And it wasn't something I enjoyed. I was very good at learning mnemonics. All the lists of documents you need for family or commercial company, you know, brilliant mnemonics. But don't ask me anything about what I may have learned.
So that's interesting, because I know that there's a sort of, I don't know if this is accurate to say, but the sort of technical side of law that doesn't really massively interest you. Is that right?
There are thousands, I keep saying this, there are tens of thousands of better lawyers than I am. Law for me, and I go back to what I said about Mandela and Gandhi, not that I am Mandela or Gandhi, but they use the law as a tool for change. That's it. In fact, my mum said to me, about 30 years ago, she said, I've been promoted in one of my promotions, and she goes, fantastic, well done. What have you done to make the lives of strangers better? I thought, what have you done to make the lives of those whom you will never meet ever better? And that was significant. You know, she said, I know you do stuff for your family, I know you do stuff for your clients, or in your case, your clients, or the people you work with, but what have you done for everybody else? And that was significant for me, because that's what I decided to do.
Extraordinary work around so-called honour killings, changing the perception, the way that they were handled by police, the way that prosecutions were dealt with. Where did that all begin?
When I became the first Muslim Chief Prosecutor in 2001, one of the things that really jumped out at me was the need to convene meetings with the public to find out what was really going on. So around knife crime, I remember I was above a bookmakers in Harlesden talking to all these men wearing bandanas on stalking victims. I was sitting next to stalking victims, understanding their concerns, antisocial behaviour victims. And anything we were, what's the word, shit at, I was really keen to get involved and engaged with. And honour-based abuse was another one where victims came to me and survivors said, Nazir, you are that word at this. All authorities are, thousands of people are suffering every year and nobody seems to be taking it very seriously. So I convened a conference actually, which was I knew was first national conference on forced marriage and honour-based violence, but I didn't know at the time it was the world's first conference. And I put victims and survivors in front of professionals, practitioners and parliamentarians, and they were as changed as I was. So the trick was, what do you do next? It's not enough to listen or arrange meetings. You've got to do something. So we set up I set up a working group with government, with all the government departments represented and NGOs. If you go online and look at the definition of honour-based abuse, that's what we came up with in 2004. And then it was storytelling, Rachel. You know, data is only so much, only as good as... There was no data, by the way. So I went to the Scotland Yard and asked them, literally, use my definition, go through all your homicides, how many of them are honour-related? And they said 12. So I knew you had data, right? But more importantly, storytelling. I realised that to change people's mindsets, it's not enough to... I used to tell them that Roxana Naz was murdered by her mother, who held her down whilst her brother held her down. You need to know that Banaz Mahmood was murdered because she kissed her boyfriend outside a tube station. You need to know that Sajda Bibi was murdered, stabbed to death on her wedding day. You need to know that, you know, over and over and over again. And the stories make the difference. And the fact that these people's names are etched to my head and their stories have been... I'm privileged to have sat down with victims and families of victims to understand what they've gone through. And so we had to change the way we approach things. And so once we need new legislation. We brought in some new legislation. We needed new guidance. We never had any guidance. At the same time, we ensured that everybody got better at it. In 2008, Rachel, I literally went everywhere. You know, if you go to a band, you get a T-shirt with all the places. My T-shirt from 2008 with the Royal College of GPs, Royal College of Midwives, the local government associations, Coroners Society of England. I went everywhere to scare the shit out of them.
Because this is in part, obviously the criminal justice system catches the consequences of these heinous crimes, but your actions were to try and help identify where there was risk and prevent it happening.
Every prosecution's a failure because somebody's already been harmed. What you have to do is try to stop it from happening in the first place. And so because of, Banaz Mahmood, who was murdered at the age of 19, we could have saved her life. She was in her house when her father walks in with marigold gloves on with a bottle of brandy and says, drink it. She's not a drinker. She smashes the window, runs down the street, goes to a woman police officer. Woman police officer smells alcohol on her breath, blood on her hands, and threatens to arrest her for drunken disorderly behaviour. One, that's racism. Two, she could still be with us if somebody didn't their job properly. And so prevention is absolutely essential.
Yeah. So we're going to move to where you took on your role in the northwest of England. You moved up here same time as I did, actually. Pure coincidence. I moved up with the BBC 2011. You moved up here to take on that role, huge role actually, covering a vast area of England. And was that the point then that you got involved with the Rochdale grooming?
Yeah, absolutely. Before that, so in 2010, Keir asked me he created a job for me, Director of Communities. And that was, I went all the way around the country talking to communities about what their issues might be. And then austerity hit, as you know. And so the county's prosecution structure had to go. And so we created a region, and the Northwest region was as big as London. I said, well, I don't know anybody in the Northwest of England. I'm sure it's easier than up here, down there, I said to myself. So off I went, and I arrived in Manchester and literally knew nobody. And then suddenly, very quickly, in fact, May I arrived in June, the police come to me and said, Nazir, we've got this case of several men who've been grooming and sexually assaulting young girls. We've got a problem. We can't prosecute them. I said, what do you mean we can't prosecute them? This is back before your time, in 2008. One of these girls had complained about these men. We had reached a decision with the prosecutors that these men, she wouldn't be believed and the case wouldn't proceed. And so, having done that, how do we now go to a jury and say, members of the jury wanted you to believe her, we didn't, but we want you to I said, well, this is what we do. We admit we got it wrong. And they said, can you imagine there was silence in the room? And I said, and by the way, I'm the chief, that's what we're going to do. Because the only way we're going to get this started is go to a jury and say to them, we got it wrong, members of the jury. She's now right here, she's here, we got it wrong. And that's how we got the case started. But that case was massively groundbreaking for all sorts of reasons. Those men were brought to justice in May 2012. And I hadn't appreciated, but people forget, and I forget. But when I moved to Manchester, we had Stepping Hill. That happened within 2 months. We had the riots in August 11. That happened within 3 months. I had 3 householders who killed burglars in a row up here. I decided not to prosecute any of them. I had the murder of Anuj Bidve, the student who was murdered at Salford, shot in the head. Literally, I thought I'd come for an easy life. And I was now dealing with the most high-profile cases in the country, or my teams were. We prosecuted that case, the men were brought to justice, and then Rachel, you and all your colleagues, the world media woke up to the issue of sexual abuse, and they came looking for an answer. And I tried to give them. I said the simplest answer is what the far right are telling you, that it's ethnicity. The more complicated answer and the real answer is that there's a cohort of women and girls that nobody believes, and who are treated with disdain, who are ignored and left aside. That's the issue we've got to deal with. And so I was doing all this media and writing all these articles to try and explain this, Rachel. I even got a phone call from somebody called David Cameron. Do you remember him? And I told, can you explain to me what's going on? Yeah, men are raping women. But that was the simplest thing, but people just didn't want to understand that. And I appreciate that because it was more complicated. The far right have a different view, though, Rachel. They decided that I damaged their narrative.
Well, I was going to say, are you a hero to the far right?
Well, I ran into Paul Golding recently, the head of British First, in Tesco car park. And he comes up and says, can I thank you narrowly, he said.
Narrowly?
Yeah, I got some narrow thanks from the head of British First. No, they came for me. I damaged their narrative. All black men are rapists. Hang on a minute, there was a brown man that overturned the decision. And so they put out fake news and decided literally to come for me. I had far-right thugs trying to break into my house. I had to have police protection for 2 weeks. A police officer outside my front door. I had to tell my kids, Prime Minister's got a police officer outside his door. It's the only way I could reassure them. I teach my 8-year-old how to use the panic alarms that we had in all our rooms. They could only go to school in taxis for several months because of the security advice I would give. I got 17,000 letters and emails in 1 week to my teams around the country calling for me to be sacked and deported. Now, as much as I love Birmingham, I don't want to go back there. Yeah? They were absolutely determined to destroy me, and they came bitterly close, Rachel. They really did. My wife had a breakdown. I'll tell you why I didn't. Number one, my staff were fantastic. I remember my PA running down the corridor with a letter containing feces saying, don't tell him, don't tell him. So they kept the worst successes from me. Secondly, my boss told my teams, Nazir must not have any meetings between 9 and 10 and 3 and 4. He is to be available to do the school run. He will not be invited to any meetings that require an overnight stay outside of Manchester because he needs to be at home to provide reassurance. I didn't even know why I wasn't being invited to all his meetings. It's only recently they discovered this, that he told people to stop doing it. Because I wouldn't have asked for help. Leaders, managers don't ask for help. So somebody has to do it for them. And the third thing that kept me going was the other victims. Once we'd opened the door and the can, thousands of women and girls started sharing their stories, and they needed justice. They needed to be heard, and we needed to change the way we were doing stuff. And so I was absolutely determined that I would stay in the job despite the personal cost.
And we are grateful that you did, because there's absolutely no doubt that you helped change the conversation around that. One just final thought from you, and we talked a lot about how much you overcame to get where you are now and to achieve the extraordinary things you have. And looking in this room now, listen, there's no doubt these brilliant, talented, deserving, hard-working people within the legal profession. But do you still think that there is an issue around representation that we need to?
Of course there is. I mean, it's still struggling. The documentary you mentioned, racism is still an issue, misogyny is an issue, sexism is an issue, homophobia is an issue, disablism. We're still bigoted, unfortunately, to enormous amounts. Age is an issue, so all sorts of reasons. However, the answer is impact. It's not enough, going back to what my mum said about what have you done for other people. Social impact, we need to do much more thinking about social impact. When you've left work, what have you done to make the world a better place for others, people you never ever meet? There was one email, I got a really terrible website, but I have a contact page where people contact me. I think you may have contacted me here on this website. And I got this email a couple of years ago, Rachel, which said, "Dear Mr. Afzal, you won't remember me. I was one of the victims of Stuart Hall. I now have terminal cancer, and I wanted you to know that my life began when you believed me." And I sent her, I didn't know how to respond. I sent her my number, and she rang me back. She said that for 30 years since the abuse that he had perpetrated against her, she was blamed for everything that she had done. Her family didn't believe her. Her whole life was a complete mess. She'd suffered PTSD, everything else. It was only when finally she was able to get justice that she could begin her life. And here she was, at the end of her life, wanted to tell me that that's what impact it had. A few weeks later, she passed. And I'm at this funeral of a woman I've never met in my life. She was just a name on a statement. And I'm asking myself, why am I here? And do you know why? She had said to me that I changed her life for the better. I wanted her to know that she had changed my life for the better.
Completely inspiring. Nazir, thank you so much. On behalf, I know, of Slater Heelis, of everyone here, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you once again for coming along as well.
Thank you so much. Great.
In education directly.
My biggest takeaway from today is law's a tool for change. That's a huge statement for anybody to take away with them in our profession. You can be the brightest lawyer, you can know every case inside and out, but the reality is What are you doing with that knowledge to affect change? And that's my biggest takeaway from today.
It's been an absolutely amazing morning. Some serious energy in the room. The guest speaker, Nazir Afzal, was absolutely engaging. We've had a fabulous morning, and it's a shame it's coming to an end.
Oh, it was amazing. It sort of reminded me of going to a concert in the old days where you think you've hit a peak, and then there's an encore, and there's another peak, and then there's another encore, and another peak. It took us on an emotional roller coaster, but very inspiring.
Love to hear his backstory, his life story, and his thoughts right up to cases that are happening in society today. It's very insightful and interesting to see his very honest and unique take on things and where things are going to be going for society, and how education really is important for the future of the country.